Welcome, Alan Fisher. Thank you so much for taking the time out on your Saturday to come to chat to us in this beautiful location.
It's a pleasure to host you in my yacht club. This is, aside from the purpose of the interview, of course, but my main interest in life outside of working hours is sailing. So we do have a lovely club, and I can't think of a better environment to conduct an interview in.
I completely agree. Alan, you're here today because you recently went to Argentina on a trip organised for you by the Argentinian Chamber of Commerce in Australia, which was coordinated by ProArgentina and the Interamerican Development Bank. And I'd love to hear your experience. How did you find Argentina when you arrived?
I went with the perspective that the average Australian would go to Argentina with, and that is, I think, to our great shame, that we don't know as much about Argentina as we might know of many other countries that we have more liaison with. And I suspect the cultural perceived barrier of being English-speaking people going to a known Spanish-speaking country perhaps presents psychological barriers that prevent more Australians from going there and experiencing the wonderful opportunities and lifestyle that I found on my trip. Of course, my trip was invited on the basis of visiting the country and talking to people and learning the style of agriculture that's practiced in order to explore any trade opportunities that we may see for interactivity between our two countries. And if that trip had not been done, the wealth of opportunities that I think I've identified, which still have to be materialised, of course, would not have been known to me. And I also gained from the changed perspective in terms of the cultural barriers I referred to earlier, yes. Whereby I would say there was no reason to fear going to Argentina. Yes, it's a Spanish-speaking country, but I found so many people spoke English either very well or passably well to be able to get by, that it's no more difficult from that point of view to visit, let's say, Germany or France, yes. or any of the other European countries that are not English speaking. Exactly. So why we have held ourselves back for so long and across such a broad spectrum of Australia society from all parts of South America, I don't know, because my perspective is so completely changed now that I can only recommend that people go there and have a look for themselves, because there are some wonderfully unexplored sites and experiences that everyone should avail themselves of.
I 100% agree with you. And Alan, you were invited by the Argentinian Chamber of Commerce in Australia to attend this trip because of your extensive experience in agriculture. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, it's an interesting perspective, because I didn't start my life in agriculture. I started out as a trainee industrial chemist, yes. And I was working in a laboratory doing industrial coatings and paints and varnishes and so on for corrosion protection, and then I later moved into metallurgy, yeah. Which got me involved more in the engineering sector, and then I was transferred to Perth back in late 1971 with a power transmission engineering company.
Oh, wow.
To open a branch office here. So that was fun and a big experience for a young fellow. And yes. Of course I was exposed to the mining sector here and the mineral processing sector. So at that stage, still nothing in agriculture. Wow. But because of my chemistry and metallurgical background, when I went in the middle 70s to live in South Africa and Swaziland for a couple of years, again practicing in engineering, and came back to Australia, now more ready to commit to a career pathway. Yes. That combined background meant that I was ideally suited to the following 6 years with a Swedish multinational company practicing in the stainless steels and chrome nickel alloys field for industrial corrosion resistance. So that was quite a technically engrossing and challenging 6 years.
I can imagine.
After that time, the chrome nickel alloy systems, which at high levels offer corrosion resistance, also at lower levels offer wear resistance. And I was invited to join a foundry and engineering group who were active in ag engineering to develop a range of wear-resistant tillage tools using a particular chrome nickel alloy system, and it was a tenuous link now, when you run the comparison, for me to enter the agricultural industry. But that was my entry to the industry, and I have to admit I knew nothing about agriculture in those days. I didn't know a tractor from a scarifier.
Yes.
And here, after over 3 decades of being in the industry, the first 4 years was working for that foundry and engineering group, and then we did a management buyout so that we actually went into business for ourselves, continuing to develop these tillage tools, and we invented some other innovative products for harvesting efficiency and so on, and we built a product range over 32 years of involvement in this company. And during that time, we developed a national market and some markets abroad, and I've now retired in March this year from 32 years of quite active involvement in the agricultural industry, to take myself from a stage where I knew nothing about agriculture to begin with, to now finding that we will lecture students at university level on some of the body of expertise that we've built over that time, and getting involved in trade missions such as this, to go to foreign markets that have as yet been unexplored, and so on. So, fascinating journey. It's a very difficult concept to step out of the merry-go-round of 32 years of a fascinating journey such as that. But yes, I've done it, and now means that I'm free to explore opportunities such as this.
Yes. And that's fantastic, Alan, because you've really got a breadth of experience across education, across machinery, across mining, across agriculture. And from that perspective, going over to a country like Argentina, I'm sure you don't just look at it through one lens.
No, you certainly don't. With a background like that, of course, I was aware of the proportions of mining versus agriculture in Western Australia. Our agricultural industry here has always played little brother to the mining industry. Our mining industry is huge in this state. It's the predominant primary industry. Then you go to Argentina, and I would suggest that the proportions are reciprocal. Agriculture is the dominant industry in Argentina, and mining is certainly present there, but not to the same proportional extent as in Australia. So from that point of view, yes, you're right. I saw opportunities in both sectors, but my focus on this trip was not on mining, it was on agriculture.
Yes.
And the structure of the trip was such that we had 2 intensive days at an exhibition for agricultural machinery and services called the Las Parejas Expo.
Fantastic.
And that was the basis of the invitation, at which these various manufacturers, who were keen to explore the opportunities I was there to try and help facilitate, through a series of 20-minute interviews. In 20 minutes you can get a fairly good idea of what a company does, what its areas of expertise are, what the opportunities might be for strategic alliances with Australian companies. But before the philosophy of that approach could be established, you really had to understand that there are major differences between the way agriculture is practiced in Argentina versus the way it's practiced here.
Right.
I think it's fair to say that Australian farmers would be highly jealous of the Argentinian agricultural sector.
Is that so?
Absolutely right. If you had to start with a blank piece of paper and design a country that was ideally suited to agriculture, it would be Argentina.
Really?
Yes, there's 1,000 millimetres average rainfall in the plains areas. The soils are rich beyond our belief. We operate with very old weathered soils. They're low nutrient value. They're often very sandy or gravelly. We have topographical barriers in the way. We have quite low rainfall by comparison. The challenge here is quite large to try and grow grain in the limited conditions that we have. We practice what is called dryland farming, and we have farmers that grow grain in 350 millimetres of annual rainfall, sometimes down to 300 millimetres of annual rainfall.
My goodness.
Having said that, however, there is a strength in the experience that we've developed in producing farming systems that suit those conditions. So therefore you might suggest when you go to Argentina, where you have 1,000 millimetres of rainfall in the ideal growing areas and ideal soils and so on, what do we have to offer? What was really interesting was to learn through briefings and exchanges with the people that we interviewed that in agriculture there's a real dynamic happening. Soybeans have become the crop of the moment. Everyone is going crazy producing as many soybeans as they can. And why not if the opportunity is there? However, the effect on the agricultural industry is such that some of the more traditional crops have now been forced out into the drier, less agriculturally friendly areas, which might get down to rainfalls half of that in the Pampas.
Wow.
And once that is the case, then of course our dryland farming systems, for which we have worldwide acknowledged expertise, may well have something to offer in return to Argentina. Mm-hmm. And so some of the conversations I had over there centred around this opportunity that we may well find ourselves collaborating with Argentinian manufacturers to produce equipment specific to those drier, more marginal agricultural areas around your ideal farming conditions, which I was very happy to go and see.
That is fantastic. Fantastic.
Yes.
And you say that when you went to Argentina, you were surprised by how welcoming people were, surprised by language not being a barrier to you? Absolutely.
I think that's something that the Australian travellers of the world, and I would target this specifically at the agricultural sector here, we're not afraid to travel, but we tend to go to US and Canada on these farm tours, and sometimes Russia and so on. I've been to Russia myself. It's also a fabulous country with great potential. But for some reason we don't seem to embrace the South American countries, and Argentina has to be credited with the motivation to now proceed to try and expand its influence across the world and seek to change the perspectives that have hitherto applied to visitors considering where to go and study agriculture. I'm here to say that with that blank page example, if you started with a blank page and had to design the ideal country, I say again that is what you would end up with is Argentina. It is perfect. It's flat plains country, deep soils, very rich in nutrients, ideal rainfall, reliable rainfall such as we don't see here, and it's supported by the most highly developed agricultural manufacturing sector that you could imagine. That was one of the surprises for me, was to go there and see how highly developed the manufacturing is and how advanced it is in materials engineering and general engineering principles. We're finding that, for example, in spray booms for spraying herbicides, that Argentina is the world leader in carbon spray booms, because carbon fibre is a very high strength but very lightweight material, absolutely ideally lends itself to carbon spray booms. The Argentinian manufacturers have jumped onto this opportunity and developed the expertise to now see themselves as world leaders in that sector, and that won't be the only sector. But when John Deere acknowledges the Argentinian manufacturer of that specific technology as its preferred supplier, I think that's a feather in the cap of Argentine manufacture.
Absolutely. And what do you think has been the hindrance, Alan? Why do you think people in Australia and perhaps people in other countries don't know all of this about Argentina?
I think it's imagined perception.
Okay.
The way around that, of course, is to go there, and I've been encouraging many people, anyone I can get to, since I've returned from this trip, to learn what I've learned, and that is to go there and see for yourself that whatever your imagined barrier is, whether it be cultural or philosophical or language or whatever, it doesn't have to be a barrier. You don't have to feel unsafe, you don't have to feel shy. The people there are so welcoming.
So warm,
so sincere, so friendly, and I think you're right to raise that point about being so warm. It was present in all of the interviews that I conducted while I was there. The people were so friendly. I didn't want so many of those interviews to finish. 20 minutes wasn't enough, because you felt the potential to have friendships, if you like, if you had the opportunity to stay longer, because the warmth and the enthusiasm and the fellowship was there, and we were all in it for the one purpose. We wanted to help each other.
Yes, absolutely. And I hope that when you were there, they took the time out to take you to get a cup of mate or to try some Argentinian Malbec or asado? Not just all work?
Can I tell you that those opportunities were forthcoming in the extreme? On the very first day of driving up to Rosario in readiness for the Las Parejas exhibition, a chap who was on the bus, one of the hosts, gave us a cup of mate tea and passed it around the bus, and I of course embrace whatever culture is in the country that I'm visiting, and I thought, well, it's a tea, let's try it. I've tried many different types of tea. The big difference with mate is that it's prepared so differently to the way we prepare tea here, but the effect is wonderful. I would encourage anyone to try mate because it's an interesting social bonding exercise to pass the mate cup around and all share the one device, if you like.
The one straw.
Of course, the practice is to finish that cup. It's then added to and passed to the next person and so on. And I also understand the culture is that you say thank you at the end of it when you're fully sated, but because of its concentration you're sated much more quickly than with the regular tea such as we drink in Australia. It's refreshing, it's invigorating, and yes, I enjoyed it. I also enjoyed the asado because Australians are noted for enjoying barbecues, so it's barbecues by another name, but of course we all know how prominent meat is in the Argentinian diet, and the quality of the meat is second to none.
Oh, it is
we think we're good in Australia, but they know how to do it.
They know how to do meat well.
And the Malbec. I'm not shy of red wine, and the Malbec in Argentina is absolutely first class. We grow good wines here too, but in terms of being shy of going to Argentina, no, you'll go over there and you'll enjoy all these experiences and want to stay longer than I had the opportunity to do.
And Alan, I can really see where you're coming from, having lived and worked in South America for 14 months, coming back in March this year. I could really personally see how my perception of Argentina and the region indeed changed itself. I didn't know so much about it before I went there. How did you feel?
Well, I was the same, except that my experience was unfortunately limited relative to yours. I would be jealous of having the amount of time that you had over there. But of course, your career is starting, so it can influence you in a bigger way than it can with me at the tail end of my career. But at least from my perspective, I can relay my experience to so many others who can take advantage of it, and that's what I hope to do. We have an organisation in Western Australia that has 132 members. They fall basically into two categories: those who will manufacture agricultural equipment for use in our farming environment here, and which we hope might have some relevance to these drier areas of Argentina, and those who are dealerships in farm machinery, and some of those dealerships have multiple branches, and they are able to import equipment from anywhere in the world. Wow. So one of the things I hope to influence is to say, well, rather than just look to the traditional sources of supply such as Europe and Northern America, have a look at Argentina.
Absolutely.
One of the benefits that I've found from doing farm machinery manufacturer visits, and we had time to do 2 of those, was to be impressed by the sheer quality of manufacture. It is second to none. It's at least the equal of manufacture in Australia. So if we're happy and comfortable with the gear that we make and produce for ourselves here, you will at least get the same quality out of Argentina. There's, again, no reason to be shy of anything related to machinery manufacture. So having returned from this brief visit, we've had several meetings already, and we've had a meeting as recently as yesterday to decide the strategy of our approach to our membership in terms of approaching agricultural manufacturing companies, to look at strategic alliances with Argentinian manufacturers who are acknowledged as being able to produce equipment more cost efficiently than we seem to be able to do in Australia. So if there's an advantage there, why not seize upon it in the most clever way? And the most clever way is not to make freight companies rich. Instead of sending whole goods to Australia with their included frames and bulk and so on, why don't we take the elaborately transformed manufactures from Argentina, the components, the sub-assemblies and so on, pack them into a container to maximise the use of the internal space, get the freight to Australia with the most efficient use of container space, so the amount of freight cost per component is quite small, and then enter strategic alliances with Australian manufacturers whereby if there's a bulky frame that needs to be produced, produce it here rather than ship all that air from Argentina. All the elaborately transformed manufacturers can then be assembled onto that frame. The painting and the putting on of stickers can then be done here at this end, because that taps into the infrastructure that is present in the Australian market already with those manufacturers, whereby if an Argentinian manufacturer tried to duplicate that for himself, he would have to start with a blank sheet of paper and get to know the market and employ the people and so on. It's just, it's an inefficient way to approach it. So why not have a strategic alliance where the people who are already operating in this market, who know the market, who have the facilities for getting equipment spread around Australia to the buyers, they have their distribution networks, they have their in-field support people, their sales people, the technical expertise. That is the way to go, I believe.
Exactly.
And that was decided from the outset that that was the most efficient way to approach collaborative manufacture. But then again, of course, you have the importing of whole goods, and we know who the members are that represent the best opportunities for Argentinian manufacturers to be represented through their distribution networks and chains of branches, and so that will be a separate exercise, conducted concurrently, but one which I think offers almost the same potential as the strategic alliances with manufacturers.
Absolutely, and hearing you talk about those strategic alliances, you're really able to paint very vividly the next steps that other people can take, people who haven't been to Argentina before with their business.
Yes, that's right. It was an exploratory trip.
Yeah.
I'm able to pass my perspectives on to those people who see business opportunities, and of course the next step will be to encourage them to go there and meet these people personally, and once they've got a relationship established, encourage the person from the Argentinian end to come here and see what, and that's a great way of setting up communication between the two parties, because then they will both understand where they're coming from, and I think that will form bonds that should last for decades, hopefully.
Yes, completely agree. Did you feel at the end of your trip that you really wanted to go back as a tourist to Argentina and see all of the different kind of geographical landscapes they have? I loved the south of Argentina, Ushuaia, the southernmost tip, the southernmost city in the world, close to Antarctica.
Well, of course, that's recognised as the departure port for trips to Argentina, something my wife would like to do, and now that we're retired, we may get that opportunity. So if we do, it will be the opportunity you're mentioning to go to Argentina and explore all these other wonderful sites that there are to see, the Iguazu Falls, the coastal scenery, the Andes. I love skiing.
Exactly.
And so the opportunities are manifold. For the things that you can
do.
do.
The wine, you can't go past that too.
I can't go past the wine anyway. So, yes, it's wonderful. No, it's a great tourist destination for people once they realise that. So yes, let's see who we can influence to go there.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad to hear you say, Alan, that you would encourage anybody to go to Argentina, be it for participating in the agricultural industry, tourism, mining industry. You would just encourage as many people as possible to go and see for themselves.
Absolutely, and if you want to get references on certain information that interests you about Argentina, we have now an Argentinian Australian Chamber of Commerce here in Perth.
Yes.
So people will get all the help and encouragement they need from there. And of course, the internet, you have unlimited amounts of information available to you. You just need to be motivated to do it.
Absolutely.
So I hope that whatever we can do to influence people through this interview will encourage them to explore Argentina as a result of my experiences. I'm smiling. I'm still smiling from the experience. I just wish it was longer.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you so much for your time today, Alan. I think it's about time that we go and have a cup of mate to celebrate.
I would love to do that. It'll relive my experiences for me. Thank you very much, Natalie.
Thank you.
Cheers.